Hey, everybody, welcome to Jen Lowry Writes. Well, today we're at the Writing Warriors for Jesus Fall Author Conference, and I am so excited to be able to introduce you to Luke Seibert. He lives in Ardmore, Alabama, and he's currently the founder of Here I Stand Ministries. He's working on his master's from Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and serves as an elder in training at Elkmont Baptist Church. Besides writing books and preaching, he enjoys woodworking, spending time with family, and playing bluegrass music. Luke, I'm so excited to have you here today for the conference.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on, Jay.
And everybody, Luke's new book, Never Saw It Coming. Here it is. Here's the cover. It's coming out soon. I wanted you to be able to get those sneak peek looks at the cover that he has just releasing. So there we go, Luke. Take it away.
All right, well, thank you, and thanks to Tish Bouvier for the cover design on that. She did an awesome job with that. But yeah, so let's talk about some nonfiction. And growing up, to be honest, I really detested writing. It was not something I enjoyed. I much rather be out with Legos or building forts outside. And I had to do some writing for school. You just can't get away from it. But looking back at a lot of my writing now, it was pretty painful. I had to do an unit study in, I think, elementary school about ancestry. You did some research about my ancestors and had to write some stuff. And I was looking back at some of my writings. It just started really slow and kind of dry. It starts off with something like, this is a story of the Seibert family, just pretty basic. And we often sometimes have that idea when it comes to nonfiction of it's just dry history or it's just a technical book that we just have to muddle through. But it doesn't have to be. Our nonfiction can still be engaging and create interest and keep the reader engaged all the way through the end. And so while I've mostly studied some fictional, about writing fiction, that's what I've written mostly, a lot of those concepts still can apply to our nonfiction work as well. And I've applied some of those in some of the Bible studies that I've written. I write some articles that I publish usually twice a month, write some for our church as well. And then I have 2 manuscripts that I'm working on. One is about to be published, as Jen said, my memoir, Never Saw It Coming. But just wanted to share some of the things that I've learned from studying about fiction and others, some feedback I've had on my nonfiction work and what I've studied from what I've seen in other works as well. So let's talk about how do we start off? How are we going to start off a book? And when we start off with our first line of like something like a memoir or a biography, we want to create the reader engagement to draw them in. Sometimes we can think of a biography starting off with, here's our subject, here's where they're born, or what the time period was, and it just seems really dry. But what we can do is we can create a hook that maybe gives a little bit of a foreshadowing into what is coming that creates that reader engagement, and we kind of go back and give a little bit of feedback. As an example, here's the first line of my book, Never Saw It Coming. I was 19, rising in my trade, and had my whole life planned out until it all changed in an instant. And then I go back and I kind of get some feedback about where I was in the story. And so creating something like that, creating a little bit of a hook with some foreshadowing of what's coming, will engage our readers and want them to stick with the book, whether it's a memoir or a biography, to stay with that and be engaged with our subject. And even when it comes to an instructional book or a topical book on a particular piece of information, we still want to create that reader engagement. Chris McKinney with the Called Writer Groups, she had given some feedback on one of my manuscripts that I had written that was titled His Glorious Bride, a theological and practical look at the church, and said that a lot of times with a book like that on a particular subject or topic, you want to start off with an introduction and a forward. The introduction explains, why are you writing this book? What makes your book unique? But not just in a dry way. You still want to engage the reader on a personal level and draw them in. One book I'm reading right now is Scripture Alone by James White, and he does an excellent job of that. He says there's a lot of books on this subject, but here's why you want to read this book. Here's why I wrote it, what makes this one different. And then your forward, a lot of times you will have someone else write that for you. And a lot of times they can describe how the impact you've had upon their life, or if it's a reprint or a future edition of the book, it can say how that book has impacted them. N.T. Wright does an awesome job with this in the classic work by F.F. Bruce, New Testament Documents, Are They Reliable? So that's kind of the theme that I've been reading a lot. So some of the books I'll reference will be about that, about the authority of Scripture and how we got the Bible. But this applies to books pretty much on any topic as well. Just if you're writing a book that's on a particular topic or information, create that introduction. You write that yourself and have someone write a foreword for you, but still engage the reader on a personal level. Some people skip over the introductions, but there's a lot of good information that can be in there. But you don't want to just make it a dry. You want to engage the reader in the work and keep them engaged in it throughout the whole throughout the rest of the book as well. And so yes, that's how we would start off and talk about engaging readers on a personal level. We can still tell stories in our nonfiction. That's not going to be something that we can shape an entire story off of per se. And we have some constraints for writing a memoir or a biography when it contained with that. But even in our books about a particular topic, we can still tell stories in it. This was something also that Chris McKinney had pointed out. Excuse me. And we want to make sure that the stories are something that people remember more. It sticks with them. Just telling them information, it will stay with them perhaps if they're interested in it. But telling it in a story fashion is something that is really going to stick with them, make it memorable, and help them to remember what the point you're trying to make. And an example is another example from my book, Never Saw It Coming. I could have written something. I'd spent some time in a rehab facility, and so I could have written something like, my therapists motivated me, and I worked hard every day. Just something really is pretty simple like that, just kind of telling. But then telling it in a more story way, giving some imagery and describing what actually happened does make it more memorable. So what I have written for this part is, throughout my time in rehab, each of my therapists tried to motivate me. Tried to push me a little harder in their own way. Cody often had a student from Vanderbilt University with him, and Rachel was all the time introducing some new activity to try and wake up the nerves in my left hand. And Sarah talked a lot about food while I tried to walk, balance on top of an exercise mound, or pedal on a stationary bike. And I go on to describe more about how that motivated me to push on. But giving some details and sort of telling a story like that does help drive our point home and helps people to remember what we're saying. And sometimes this would be a great thing to incorporate even in a book on a particular topic. Some of the books that I've read recently have done this is Know Yourself, Know Your Money by Rachel Cruz. She's talking through some financial points and wise advice about that, but she often will tell a personal experience in a way for the reader to connect. And especially in this day and age, people, they want to know information, but they want to know how it's impacted you. They want to know your experience, what difference that's made in your life. So giving a personal experience or a testimony as sort of a segue into the rest of the topic, to the rest of the subject for that particular chapter, is a great way to do that. And other books do that as well. An excellent book I've read pretty recently was The Gospel-Driven Ministry by Jared Wilson. It's a great book, but he'll use a lot of illustrations in a story way to start off his topic for each chapter, and then we'll expound upon that in a lot of exposition and go into a lot of detail in describing that. But the story really sticks with you in a memorable way that draws you in to hear the rest of the things that he has to say. But the story doesn't always have to come at the beginning of a chapter for that type of a book. Again, James White, A Scripture Alone, he starts off with laying off, here's the basic premise I'm incorporating in this chapter, starting giving some exposition to explain what he's talking about. And then he goes into a time of dialogue. He has two characters that he's created, Joshua and Robert, and there's having this conversation going back and forth, discussing and debating the topic that he has just expounded upon or introduced. And that conversation kind of creates that vivid imagery of, okay, you can see this happening, and it really drives home his point and sticks with you a lot more than if it was just exposition or like a textbook. So telling stories, even in our nonfiction work, whether it's a memoir or a biography, or whether it's a book on a particular topic or subject, are great ideas. We have taken the time to write this book, to get it out there. And we don't want people just to read it and then move on and forget it. We have a message that we feel is important, that people should read. And so we want it to stay with them. And so telling stories is an excellent way to do that. And again, we can just use those maybe as illustrations or kind of a way to drive home our point. Just make it stick. That's really what we want to happen. Is we want the information that we are sharing to stick with the people, with our readers. We took the time to write it and felt the Lord led us to share it. And we want to make sure that it stays with people. And so as we've been going on, we've been talking about how we start off our nonfiction works, whether it's a memoir or a biography, an autobiography. Started off with that hook, maybe giving a little bit of a foreshadowing or something to create the engagement. Then you can go back and give the details about, if it's a biography, who it's about where they're from, when they were born, and some of those details that can really lose people right off the bat. But creating that kind of a hook and drawing the reader in with a memoir or an autobiography, and then with a book on a particular subject or topic, creating that story. It doesn't have to be long. You could just be a few sentences, but a story to capture the reader's attention, to engage their imagination, and to, in a way, prepare their minds and open their ears to hear what you're having to say. And it's a way to sort of laying the groundwork for what you're about to come. Or if it's a story comes later in the chapter, as an example to drive home really what you're teaching, what you're saying. And just checking my notes. And same can be true for even an article. So it's just creating a short little introduction story, creates that reader hook, and draws them in and convinces them, hey, this is worth your read. Tell a short story like that as well could be another way to create that hook. And we're all busy, and our schedules fill up really quick, and there's a lot of articles and blogs that are out there, and you're trying to create that. You're trying to convince your reader, hey, this is going to be worth your time. This is engaging. I promise I'm going to have important information that I want to share with you. And you're trying to convince them that this is going to be worth the investment of their time. And so we want to create that hook, even in something like an article or a blog, to draw our readers in. And so as we were talking about our nonfiction works and how we start off with an engagement with their introduction or the hook, we talked about how we can even tell stories in our nonfiction, even if it's not a memoir or biography, even just using it as an example. Another way that we can create that reader engagement and keep them with us throughout our book is considering our tone that we have. And that's really depends on what you're looking for. And Diana Needham did a great job with this yesterday, talking about identifying our audience. And that's who you are. If you're writing for an academic book, such as a textbook or more technical work, you want to use more formal words. Use a larger vocabulary. You want to stay away from contractions a lot of times. You want to create something that's more formal. It's the tone that your readers are going to expect and want. If we're using casual language or hip phrases and contractions in a work that's supposed to be a technical and authoritative work, so just like a textbook, our readers are going to be wondering, okay, are they really the most authoritative person to be speaking on this topic? But on the other hand, if we're trying to create a book for the general market, for a person who's not really reading for a technical work, if it's a memoir or an autobiography or even a book on a particular subject, that it's not necessarily very technical, but it's still information we're trying to get out there. Using a more conversational tone is a way that's going to keep a lot of people engaged. If a textbook can really lose a lot of people unless they're interested in it. There's a book I read recently by Michael Kruger. It was called Canon Revisited. It's looking at how we know that the books that we have in the New Testament are really the ones that we're supposed to have. And it's a very long work. I think it's about 15 or 16 hours long if you listen to the Kindle version of it. It's a really technical, kind of an abstract work, but I was engaged in it. It was a topic I was interested in. But for someone who's kind of exploring the topic of how can we rely upon the New Testament, it's not something I would necessarily recommend. It would lose a lot of people really quickly. So knowing who your audience is and what you're trying to present, who you're trying to engage, is going to affect the tone that we have. So if we're trying to use a conversational tone for the general market, using some contraction, maybe a little more casual language not too much. You don't want to be too casual, but creating as if we're having a conversation in our books. And shout out to Jen Lowry with the Monarch Method. Her book I read about how to write a novel from start to finish was an excellent book, and she did a great job keeping that conversational tone. And it sticks with you. The points that she's making and the examples that she has given is encouragement to think about putting Jesus first and remembering our why. I won't give all the details away, but I definitely encourage you all to go check that out and to give that a read. But just again, knowing our audience, who are we trying to reach? What are we trying to communicate? Making sure that we are doing that, even in the way, our tone, our choice of vocabulary, even. All these things are aspects that come together to engage our readers, to keep them with us. Again, we've taken the time, we've put the investment into to write this and to get it out, to actually make ourselves sit down and write this. And we don't want it to just be for nothing. We want to honor the Lord with our writing and direct people to Him. And we want to make sure that we don't lose our readers in that. And so starting off really strong, if it's more a book on a particular topic or informational book, use that introduction and forward. Yeah, it may seem a little tedious at times. It's something else to write, but it does help your book just to stand out and explain to your readers, here's why my book is unique. Here's why you want to read this instead of someone else's work. And you may write about, okay, if you want to go deeper, here's some of the books you could look at, but here's why this book is unique. Doing that introduction, getting a forward can give some credibility to your book from someone else. If it's a memoir or an autobiography or a biography, something like that, or even an article, create that hook right there at the beginning. Show your readers, hey, this is going to be worth your time. You want to stick with this, stick with me to the end. Even if I have to get through a little bit of technical or some maybe a little bit drier background information, stay with me because this will be worth your read. And then our tone as well, identifying our audience and making sure that we are writing to them in a way that they're going to receive and expect from the type of work that we are presenting out. Again, as I mentioned a lot of times in the conference, is to know your genre and to know what your readers are going to expect from that. Another thing to consider, this is more specifically with a memoir, or a book, is to consider a theme in a book. It's one difference between writing a nonfiction work such as like a memoir and autobiography is that we can't come up with all the details. Life happens, and with fiction writing, we are really open-ended. We can take the story however we want, create details, events happen, and tie it up. If it's not a happy ending, but tie up all the loose ends, bring it to a nice conclusion, and shape it however we want to with our theme. Life isn't always like that, but we have stories to tell, whether they're in a memoir or autobiography or even someone else's story, a biography. But introducing a theme is one way we can help tie maybe some of these events that can seem a little disjointed, but tie them together in a way that our readers are able to follow and will stick with us. An excellent example of this is Fly by Lex Gillette, a story of a blind long jumper who competed in the Paralympics. And he does an excellent job in the book. It's somewhat of a shorter book, but it's great telling his life story. And he ties together the theme of Fly with it, from his title to the illustration of long jump and what's involved with that, to that call to action right there at the end of the book. It all ties together with this word fly. And I'll give away any more details than that, but I encourage you to go check that out. It's an inspirational read, and it's a great example of how to introduce a theme into a memoir or an autobiography. And so we've been covering a lot so far. We've talked about how we start off, with a nonfiction work. If we're writing a memoir or an article, create that hook right there at the beginning. If we're writing a book on a particular subject or topic, use that introduction and forward. And I know a lot of times I've read in books and I've skipped right over them, but a lot of people do. But there are people who will take the time to read it, and I've started doing that. And I've been encouraged with some of the books that I've read by reading what people have to say in the forwards about how, okay, this author's had this impact upon the person who wrote the forward. Maybe the information they're going to present in this book will have the same impact upon me. So it's worth the time to do that. Also talked about how we can share stories, and talked about our tone and introducing theme. But now let's start getting into some more of the content of what we include in our nonfiction works. And we need to make sure that we don't think that we have this idea that we have to go it alone, that we can still do our research in a nonfiction work, even if it's something like a memoir or a autobiography. I mean, hey, the stories happened to us, right? I mean, we know what happened. Well, true, but taking the time to interview other people who were involved helps us create a larger picture, a more fuller image of what actually happened. It helps us maybe fill in some gaps, or even if it's not information that we may necessarily include in the book, it helps us give us as writers a more accurate understanding of what happened, maybe some details we didn't know about. I did this when I was writing I Never Saw It Coming. I interviewed a few people who were involved, and they shared some stuff I had no idea actually happened. And some of that did not include in the book, just it wasn't necessarily relevant for the message I was trying to convey or the theme I was trying to present in there. But it did help me give me a fuller understanding of the events that I was writing about, even though it was what happened to me. But interviewing others is a great way to do that and to include in our work. It's worth the time to do the research for that, and to remember that we don't have to just go alone on this journey. We're making about the power of connection is one of our themes for this conference. And so interviewing people is showing them, hey, look, I value what you're going to say. You were involved in this, and I want to honor you by interviewing you and seeing what you had to say about this topic as well. And so that's for like a memoir and autobiography. If we're doing a biography, absolutely, we need to interview those people who actually knew the person. And with our books that are on a particular topic or they're informational, we definitely want to use research and make use of endnotes and footnotes you could do, but having them at the bottom of the page really can break up your reader experience. So including them either at the end of the chapter or at the end of the book is a great way to do it. I like having them at the end of the chapter. I think it's a good way where you don't break up the reader experience, where the person can read the chapter and get the information without any interruptions. But if they want to dig a little deeper into it, they can go right to the end of the chapter. It's right there. It's accessible, but it doesn't clutter up your work instead of having to flip to the end of the book. If I'm having to flip to the end of the book to find out what they're referencing on page 20, I may not do that. A lot of people may not take the time to do it. But if it's just right there at the end of the chapter, hey, they're already right there. They can just look it up. And so including the endnotes is a great way to do that. And it gives credibility to your writing. If we're writing about a particular subject, we want to show people, hey, I've done my research. I know what I'm talking about. This isn't just my opinion, something that I just came up out of my own experience. And while it's important to share about our own experiences on the subjects that we're writing about, even in nonfiction, we want to show, look, I'm not the only one doing this. I didn't just come up with this out of left field. So it's a way to give credibility to our writing. And it's another way that we can honor other authors. And this is something Jen often encourages us with is saying, look, I value this person's work enough to include it in my own. I want you to go and to check this out. And even in like Bible studies or devotionals, taking the time to say, hey, if you want to go a little further, you want to dig into this a little bit more, here's some other works you can do, other works you can look at and to read. And a really unique way that this author did it was in 9 Marks of a Healthy Church by Mark Deaver. He had those for further study sections at the end of each chapter. But he broke them up. He said, okay, if you want to go a little bit more into this, maybe a little bit deeper, here's some works. But if you are really sort of the advanced student and really want to dig into this, here's some more detailed, longer, more technical works. And so you knew what you were wanting. If you knew you really wanted to take the time and dig into it, you could go to the advanced further reading section. But if you were just wanting to read a little bit more, see other comparable works to 9 Marks of a Healthy Church, there were some works right there. So you knew what doing. You didn't have to go and try to figure out, is this really worth my time? You sort of knew what to expect from that. So including those further study sections at the end of a Bible study or a devotional is a great way to do that. And if you're not referencing another work, including a passage of scripture at the end is a great way to do that, or adding a place of reflection. There are some books that I've read, some devotionals that had that just said, hey, here's a passage of scripture. Go study it. Maybe here's some journal questions you could include, or just include a place of journaling. Tish Bouvier did this great in her haiku book, Everyday Haiku, Life is a Prayer, had a passage of scripture in a place where people could journal after reflecting on what was written there. And so that's a great way to do it, to draw the reader in, make them engaged in it, where they're not just reading, but they take the time to reflect and engage with what the material that has been written and going deeper with that. And so that's another way we can do that. And so we've talked about our endnotes and our further study sections for those type of works. But let's not talk about length. Length can be so that can be a deterrent to a lot of people, or it can be attractive. it depends on what they're looking for. If you kind of want a cursory look at a particular topic, let's say history, a particular period of history, you kind of want to familiarize yourself a little bit more with that time period. You just want to find something pretty quick. 3-volume set that's takes 128 hours to read. Yeah, that's gonna be a pretty big deterrent. Unless you really want to dig into that. There's a set of history books that I really dug into that particular time because I really wanted to study it more. I ate it up. It was really engaging. The tone was excellent. And by the Civil War narrative by Shelley Foote. And because I was doing some research on that time period. But if you were just kind of a cursory period of history, such as let's say the conflicts going on in Europe during the time of the Reformation. I've read some technical works on that for school, and they can be pretty dry and long. But if maybe finding a book that's a little bit shorter, it's going to be more attractive for people who are more in the general audience who are just trying to find a more cursory way to familiarize themselves with the subject. So again, it comes back to considering your audience. What is your audience looking for and writing to that? For a book that's on a particular subject or topic that's sort of inspirational or encouraging, that Chris McKinney recommends about 10 to 15 chapters. It's a good length for that, where you can go into enough detail for your reader to give them the information, but you don't drag it out too long. But on the other hand, if you try to create a technical work that really delves into the subject in a lot of detail, create a longer book. But it comes back to knowing your audience and what they're expecting and what's going to keep them involved and what they're expecting and what's going to create the information to them. And articles, and this is something I've kind of struggled with, is making sure our articles are at the length that our readers are going to expect. If we're writing to people who are in a busy schedule and we just want to create a word of encouragement to them, we don't want to fill that up with pages of technical jargon. That's going to lose people. And while it may be great things that we're saying and we're really passionate about it, we could lose a lot of readers. And I had some feedback from one of my professors about one of the articles I had written. He's like, you had good information, but you were pretty verbose. Work on paring down your words a little bit, saying it in a simplified way that really just gets your point across, and using our words strategically. And it really just depends, again, on what you're trying to present. Who are you trying to engage? And making sure that we are doing that so that our readers stay with us. And we've been talking about, we've discussed about our introduction, just kind of giving a little review, because I know we're covering sort of a wide gamut about nonfiction and overview. And we've talked about how we open, talked about how we can tell stories as illustrations and creating that engagement, using the tone that's appropriate for the work that we are writing, for which our audiences are going to expect us to have. Talked about giving credibility to our work by using footnotes and we're using endnotes. That in a way to honor other authors as well, and showing that, hey, we've taken the time to do our research. We know what we're talking about, and so you can trust what we're saying about this. And we've talked about that. We talked about including a theme in a memoir or autobiography. It's a way to tie together some of the events that we're writing about. And so we've talked about how it comes to the overall structure. We've talked about some of the details about what you can include in that. But what about marketing? What are some ways that we can do to create that reader engagement? We talked about giving credibility. And one way we can do that is to get endorsements for our work. And they can get the reader's attention and show, hey, this is worth your time. That they're saying, hey, people will look at endorsements and say, okay, wow, this person had this experience reading the book. This was their impression. This is maybe it should be worth my time to read this or to spend the money on it, whether they're a library or a bookstore or even just browsing on Amazon or Barnes & Noble online. And endorsements can be a great way that we can give credibility to our writing, and a lot of authors will use this, especially in nonfiction. And we can include it in a lot of places. We can include it on like the fly cover of like a hardcover book, use it on the back cover, even in the sales description that we have. But a way to show that, hey, look, this is why you want to read the book. What other people are saying about it, to in a way promote or to share about what we were saying. As one of the presenters yesterday was talking about using whatever language we choose with that. But again, just comes back to giving credibility that we've created worthwhile work. We want people to read it, and knowing what people are going to expect and what they're going to want. Using those endorsements is a way that we can inspire trust in our readers, as well as just making sure that we take our time with our research, including those end notes, and as we mentioned earlier. Another way that we can market our work is one I came across recently by Joanna Penn. And she wrote an article about using keywords in our book titles and our article titles. And it's included some of her works on her book, her work on her website, thecreativepen.com, and a pen spelled there with a double N. And she's included this to do subtle. Don't just string together a bunch of keywords in your title that don't really make sense, but maybe use a couple strategic ones in your title, your subtitle, or in the body of your work, or for an article, or if it's a book, including that sales description. Find out what keywords your audience is using. What are they searching for? And creating a title or a subtitle or your description strategically in a subtle way. Don't want to be in your face that you're just throwing all these keywords together, but in a subtle way so that it drives traffic to your book. It shows up when people are searching for those items, that they're searching on a particular topic, and hey, there's your book, there's your article. It's showing up, that getting it out there in front of readers, that we want them to go to read what we have written, what we have done, and getting it out there so that they can read it and gain the information that we've taken the time to study and prepare and to write, and to getting it out there and making sure that we are getting our point across and pointing them to Jesus. And this was so I was actually studying this morning. The Lord led me in my Bible study. I was working through 1 Corinthians 2, and I was looking at verse 2 there, where the Apostle Paul is speaking about as a time when he had been there among the Corinthians. And he says, "For I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified." And digging into a little bit of the Greek word for know and what it means when he says to know nothing not anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. The word, when we look at what that means, and what Paul is saying is, I directed my attention to Christ. I looked at him, I focused upon him, and I was taking your attention to look at Jesus as well. And that's what we want to do with our writing too. We've taken the time to look, to research. The Lord has given us a message. We've looked at how knowing him affects our topic, the story, how he's impacted our life, whether it's in our memoir or autobiography, whatever we're writing. And we want to take other people's attention to that too. We want to direct them to Jesus. That's what we're all about. So for the Writing Warriors for Jesus, we're writing for him. And so making sure that our messages that we are sharing, our readers are going to stay with us. We're pointing them to the Lord Jesus. But if we lose them at the beginning, or they begin to question, hey, are they really the most authoritative person to be writing on these things? We can lose them, and they can get distracted from the message that we're trying to present. But if we take the time to do our research, to make sure that we know what we're talking about, to interviewing people for writing something like a biography or a memoir, doing the research to find comparable works that we could use in a further study passage section, or as endnotes, as references, citations, it gives credibility. It's like, hey, you know what? This particular topic, I may not have a PhD in it, but I've done my research, and here are some works that you could really benefit from looking into. Here's what some other people are saying, but I studied this. Here's what I'm explaining, teaching about this, and you can trust me. I've taken the time to do this, and I'm sharing this with you. You can trust what I'm saying. We want to get our message out there. We want our readers to stay with us, to hear what we have to say, and to walk away with the message that we're trying to present to them. And we can use this in a lot of techniques, like using stories, even just as illustrations, but creating that reader engagement, keeping them with us, and so make sure that we don't lose them in the middle of it, not going too long, or including details in a memoir that may not be necessary. Again, this comes back to theme and driving home that message, so we point people to Jesus, is that we don't lose them in the way. And one analogy I felt the Lord had led me in a little while ago was the idea of building a boat. I've never actually built a boat seaworthy, but read some works, about it. They talk about, or there are history books that are talking about some boat construction, and just thinking about the process of that you've got a lumber yard full of lumber, which can be used and is good and it's sound, but you want to use the specific things that are needed to create that boat to carry your message. And that's what we want to do with our writing, that there's so much we could say about particular topics or about stories, but what is essential? what is it going to take to carry our message to our destination, to the readers, that they'll read it all the way through. We don't lose them, but they understand the point that we are making, the message that we are giving. So, and part of that comes from doing our research, preparing before we write, and even as we're writing, making sure that we are doing our research, taking the time to do that, that we make sure that we're using the tone, what they're going to expect, creating the length, everything that comes into presenting the message that the Lord's led us in these topics that we're going to write, whether it's an article, a memoir, or a book on a particular topic or subject. The Lord's led us in it. We've done the work and we've written it, we've gotten it out there, but we want to make sure that readers can do it. And so just wanted to, some of the things that I've been looking at about writing nonfiction, and I hope they're an encouragement, and just some things that the Lord has led upon my heart to share. So thanks. Appreciate Jen letting me come on here and share. I know we're a little bit early, but didn't know if there's any questions in the chat.
We have tons of questions and comments in the chat. Luke, taking notes from this presentation from me, man, I was on it, constantly writing, just reiterating what you were saying and realizing, wow, I have a lot of work to do when I go back up into checking out my previous devotionals and nonfiction work. Everything you were saying was like, oh, I need to go back and do that. So thanks, Luke.
Oh, thank you.
I've got a checklist, and we do have some questions here, and I'm going to go back into the chat. So one of our first questions is from Peter Fenton. He is a playwright and a publisher and podcast host, and he has asked this question. I've heard it said the best nonfiction requires vulnerability of its author. How did you get to that place of vulnerability to tell your story at a young age?
Well, I would say it was a lot of prayer. Though a book never saw it coming. The events took place when I became blind was about 5 years ago. And so for a while, I wasn't ready about it. And I had come to peace with what had happened, but I just didn't feel I was ready to just share it out. And so just a lot of prayer, and people were saying, hey, when you're going to write your book, you need to write and tell the story. And just pray, like, Lord, will you show me the time, and seeking him. And I really, that's what my experience with that, but not sure what other people have done. But for me, it was really just seeking the Lord and saying, okay, Lord, this is what you've done in my life. Now, when will you have me tell it?
So Anne from Anne Writes Inspiration, she asked, did you find it harder to write your memoir than writing fiction?
Yes. Yeah, I feel it was harder, not so much from an emotional standpoint, but from knowing what to include. I had included a lot of details, a lot of stories, a lot of backstory from what the main turning point had happened. And I had someone read it, and they said it was good information, way too much. You're going to lose your reader and take them down these rabbit holes. Just make sure that you're keeping it on point with your message. And so with fiction, I felt I had a pretty good idea of knowing my story and shaping that. But when it comes to writing the story of life, there's so much that's happened, and we can't include all the details. So really sorting that out and shifting what's most important, what's going to drive my message, and so my readers walk away with what I'm hoping they'll walk away with.
So one of the questions that I wanted to know was, I loved it when you said about considering a theme. That's also a vital point that we can do when we're outlining, when we're writing, editing. So if you look back at your process, did you have messages that you wanted to convey, or did they just all fall into place as you wrote?
I think it's a little bit of both. And this is with my fiction and nonfiction as well. I have a starting theme, or even a couple of themes that I'm like, before I write, I'm like, this is what I want my reader to walk away with. This is what I want them to know. And sometime as I begin to write, the Lord will say, okay, we'll include this theme too. And it's actually happened with one of my novels I'm editing right now. I'm like, okay, Lord, I didn't have that theme in mind when I wrote this, but I see I need to go back and incorporate that into my writing.
So there you go, Luke, honoring the blank page. Yep. I see it. So Eli asked the question, I have wondered what was in your mind that moment you decided to write your memoir, that final deciding moment?
For me, it was looking back, was that, okay, yes, this story happened to me, but God, this is what you've done. It's a story of how you've acted, what you've done, and glory goes to you. And so I need to get out there and tell people and share them. And I can only go so far personally, physically, but if I have it printed out on ebook and print, it can go a lot farther than I could just traveling myself. And so that was my moment, just saying, okay, Lord, this is what you've done, and And I want to honor you and tell other people what the story of what you've accomplished.
Love it. Diana is in the chat with us, and Diana said that with her clients who are writing a book that's tied to their business, she advises them to open their book with their heart story. What happened to them or someone they cared about that sparked the book idea.
That's good.
Yes, and I think you resonated on that earlier about, telling the why and telling the why this book is different on this particular topic and why you should stick around and read it. Just hold on.
Yeah.
And Luke, I want to say you did an amazing job at that. And never saw it coming. Like, I never saw it coming, from all of the tears and the laughter and the more tears that we cried together reading your book. And it's just an amazing testimony. But the way that you've structured and crafted the book just really does engage a reader and hook a reader in. And so I am sitting on the end where I've read your work. I've read your memoir. So when you talk about credibility, trust, and that whole, authoritative role, every tip that you're giving me right now, I'm taking to full heart, because I, as a reader, felt engaged, felt present, felt in the moment with you, because you did tell your heart story in a way that is memorable. So all of those tips that you're giving out, guys, take them to heart, because never saw it coming. Trust me, you're going to want it. And I think that Eli even said it needs to be on everybody's shelf. He said that earlier. I'm like, yes, Eli. Yes, Eli, you're so right. Because we can't wait to get our personal copies, signed copies. I'm just letting you know, Luke. I want another.
It's coming.
I already have one of yours signed. I want another book signed.
Yep.
So I'm going back through. I think we had a couple of more questions. So I'm scrolling through.
All right.
I know that Ruth asked a question too. That was a really good one. And she said, would you recommend a fiction author write a nonfiction book just to change things up a bit?
I think it might be a good idea. It's been it's stretched me a little bit with the different writing process. There's a lot of crossover with some of the techniques that we could use, but sort of the general approach that we have, where your subject and what's actually going to happen, what you include, that's already determined for you with nonfiction. With fiction, it's completely open. As much as you can imagine, wherever you want to take it, and however you want to shape the story, it's all open. Everything's on the table, whatever you want to do with it. But with a nonfiction, whether it's a particular topic or a life event, the event's already determined for you. It's just a matter of how are you going to take that information and shape it in a way that your reader is going to stay engaged with and want to read.
And there's something else that I know that the audience is very appreciative of. I know that I am. Hearing you rattle off all of the research of the different types of nonfiction books that you have just studied personally. Did you do that just for your own reading enjoyment, or did you do that as comp titles for your book?
Not really for my book per se. I think you had mentioned Fly, Gillette, as a comp title.
Yes.
But all these other books, study about how we got, it's just really just personal reader enjoyment and studying for me about the topics of the book. How we got the Bible and why we can trust it is really been a passion of mine and kind of a hobby since high school. And so a lot of those books may be a little technical, but I really enjoyed reading them.
But I love also that you have taken notes, whether have you written down things that you liked, things to consider for future work? Because like you would say, oh, I like the way that this person started with dialogue and they created these two characters to really hit their point across and to be able to debate. And then you said, I like how they did the footnotes here, but they put it at the end of the chapter, and I like this. Were you taking notes as you're going through and reading for reader enjoyment, or is it just that memorable to you that it's sticking around in your brain?
It's just been that memorable, and some books, like the one book I'm reading, James White, The Scripture Alone, I have been reading that as, okay, what is his approach? What is he doing? Really trying to analyze that. But with a lot of the other books, it's just been subconscious. Something will pop out like, okay, yeah, I liked how they do that, or yeah, that didn't exactly quite work there. That kind of lost me a little bit, but just some things that just stuck with me.
So I will say that is the young adult brain. That is the young man brain. And that is the young man brain coming out. My old brain would definitely have to be taking mental notes and physical notes. I would be in a journal writing all of that down. Because then as you were talking, I was like, oh, a foreword. I really should go back and do one of those. Oh, put links in. Yeah, I should do links. And someone in the comments talked about how they would refer back. And we're really glad that Sharon is with us today. Sharon Rolfe is here. And she said that when she wrote Action to Take, that she would actually make it conversational by adding in some podcast conversations that she had. And she would then link them back out to her podcast.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was like, that's a great idea.
Yeah. And some of the stuff too with research, I've read a lot of books and I'll hear a piece of writing advice from an instructor or just another author. And I'll start thinking, I remember how in this book, this author has done this, and it starts lining up just from as I hear other authors and talk with them.
Yes, so I think I love the chat. The chat has really blown up, Luke, throughout this whole entire time. I know that Tish has said, Luke, you are amazing. Love you.
Oh, thanks, Tish.
Eli has given you an amen. Ruth said, great. Thanks, Luke.
Thank
you. We want to thank you so much. It is now 10:46, Luke. That means that this session is now over, but I want to just thank you so much for everything that you do for the Writing Warriors for Jesus, just spreading the message of Christ. You're out there moving and shaking, Luke, all the time, and we're just so proud of you.
Oh, thanks, Jen. I appreciate coming on here and sharing.
So, guys, stick around. Go get some water. Take an exercise break really quick. Start doing some jumping jacks right by your desk. And then join us back here at 11 o'clock because we have M. Michelle DeRosier that is going to be talking with us today about writing authentic and diverse characters and how we can represent the heaven that we're going to. All right, Pooja said, thanks, Luke. Everybody's popping Pooja. In. So, guys, I'll see you at 11. Thanks again, Luke.
All right, thanks, Jen.
Bye, guys.